Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon, and I've been investing in property for over 20 years. And if you're an active landlord or planning your next property investment, this podcast is for you. I hope you enjoy this episode. And if you do, I would really appreciate it if you could tell a couple of other property people about the Business of Property podcast. As we close in on the end of January now, January 2025, I thought it would be a good time to review the state of the property market, have a look at some stats, and I've just chosen a few to pick out today. And I do also have a screen share running to show you some of the graphs as we go through these numbers. So if you're listening to this as a podcast rather than watching it as a video, do feel free to follow the links through to the YouTube channel for the Business of Property, where you can see the video and you'll be able to see the graphs there as well. So after the long slide at the end of last year, it does look now like the new property listings coming onto the market are holding fairly stable, sort of around 30,000 a week, which is back to the level we would kind of expect. So hopefully this means things are sort of back to normal for the beginning of the year. For the next stats that I'm going to pick out, I'm going to look particularly at average house prices, but I'm going to particularly pick up on 3-bed properties. And this is to try and avoid sort of being distorted by fluctuation in the mix of smaller or larger properties that are coming onto the market. The stats I'm going to pull out are just referencing the 3-bed properties. And particularly here, I'm looking at new listing prices. So obviously, once a property comes onto the market and onto the property portals, quite often the price goes up or down. And this data is specifically looking at new listing prices. And we can see that in January 2024, the 3-bed new listing price was £333,620. That's the average for a 3-bed property coming onto the market. Nowish, for properties coming on to the market in January 2025, they're coming on at an average of £342,990. Now, that's an increase of 2.8% over the year. So that's roughly in line with sort of the forecasts and predictions that were coming out last year for how well the end of the year would finish. So that seems reasonable. Although it is worth mentioning that the January average for January 2025 is actually lower than the monthly average peak that occurred back in the summer of last year. To add some month-to-month comparisons as well, which I think is sort of interesting to see, the directionality of the market, how it's moving and things. So from December 2023 to January 2024, we can see that there's a 1.7% increase in the average asking price of newly listed properties, 3-bed properties that is. And then if we compare that to December 2024 to January 2025, which we're in now obviously, then the difference there is a 3% increase in asking prices. So I'm not sure if that would suggest that perhaps December was especially bad last year, or whether this January has seen a particular jump in prices and people are being particularly optimistic. To help us find a small hint to point us in the direction of a possible answer for this, we could perhaps look at the number of properties that are being reduced in price. So the graph that you can now see if you're watching the video of this is the percentage of properties that have been reduced in price in a given month. So out of all of the properties on the market in that month, how many of them saw a price reduction? And if we go back to last year, so January 2024, we can see that 17% of the properties on the market were reduced, whereas in January this year, 2025, 18% of properties on the market have been reduced. Now, I think perhaps that might suggest that the initial asking prices of properties this month have been a little more overinflated than in 2024, and they're seeing just that slightly higher number of them being reduced. So maybe that's pointing to January being a little overheated, or people being a little over-optimistic in their initial pricing, at least. moving on to looking at the time to sell. So this is the number of days that a property is on the market before it gets sold. So then between being listed and being marked as sold subject to contract. And this is, as you can see from the graph, very traditionally a peak in January, obviously because things slow down at the end of the year and not much is happening, or far fewer people are looking for properties and making offers and taking properties off the market. So there is always a peak in January. In January 2024, it peaked at 87 days, whereas in January 2025, it's currently looking at like a peak of 84 days. So that would suggest that this year is actually doing a bit better. So maybe that increase in price, those higher asking prices in January 2025, perhaps they are a bit of a mix of correct optimism, increase in demand in the market, but then perhaps just taking a little step too far, and we're seeing some of those being brought back in price a little bit. And last but not least, I'm going to have a quick look at rental prices. So again, I thought we might focus specifically on 3-bed properties, just as a bit of a comparison, but consistent with what we're looking at with asking prices for sale. And the listing price of rentals for 3 beds in January 2024 was 1,540. And then jumping to January 2025, we're now up to £1,601. So there's definite increase there. And that, in fact, is an increase of 4% across the year. So rental prices are still looking very strong. Although, again, it's worth noting that the figure for January's asking rent isn't quite as good as the peak that we saw back in summer. So it's very similar to the numbers we saw in sales listings. January is going up, but it's not quite at the peak we've seen recently. If you found looking at these graphs and these stats and considering the numbers on what they might mean for the property market, you can get a weekly summary of these and quite a few others as well, covering the whole of England, the whole of the English property market. You can get that emailed to you completely for free. Just visit thebusinessofproperty.com and you will find there a link to join the mailing list. So just put in your details there and sign up for the email list. And every Monday, you'll receive a completely free collection of graphs describing the property market right up to that point, up to the Sunday before the email sent, in fact. Or if you're interested in looking at more localized versions of this data, because you want to know what's happening in your particular patch where you're looking at investing, then you can find those in PatMa's Deal Finder Pro. And they're available either on the web, as I've been showing today in the video, or in fact, and when you enter the area you're interested in, PatMa will send you an email as well as making them available to you on the web. So every Monday, you'll receive the much more localized collection of graphs and market data. If there's a particular property market statistic that you would like me to discuss or to highlight, or indeed that you feel is missing from these reports and you think would be useful, then please do get in touch. You can reach me on show@thebusinessofproperty. But for this episode, that's it. Until next time.